It struck me, so we're looking at conceptual threshold crossings. It struck me that there are moments in postgraduate students' learning journeys, and I think of them as journeys because they go on for such a long time and they develop so much, when they start to behave at a level which suggests to you that they're working more cleverly. Now that's a sort of disrespectful term, if you like, but they're making what I call learning leaps. Something happens and they think, oh wow, I've got it now. That's usually what they say. And they have a breakthrough in their thinking. They start to work and write at a much more theorised, complex, conceptual level. And they start to move on in their project. And this is great for us as well, and it's nice to work out what we might have done to help them on that journey. So I'm going to look at the work that we've done on various projects, but particularly the Doctoral Learning Journeys project, which lasted for 3 years, which looked at students' learning journeys and their awareness of moments where they started to work more conceptually, critically and creatively, because that's what we're after really. So I want you to be thinking while I do this, when did that happen to me in my research learning journey? And it would have happened more than once. There were several times when you thought, oh, now I get it. You know, you might be in the middle of reading something, or you might be in a conference, someone says something, or you say something. You might be explaining your piece of research to a relative, you know, the father-in-law test, or you might be explaining it to a colleague who's not quite sure what it's about, or you might be writing, or you might be out, people who work in the field, you know, they're botanists, or I don't mean that kind of field, but they actually have to go and interview train drivers, or people who are actually working in their field, quite often say, I didn't really understand what I was looking for, nor what I was finding, until I started looking at the reed beds or interviewing the train drivers, and then the whole thing came together. So these moments of breakthrough, which I think happen a lot, or not a lot, and then with the not a lot, we need to think, what is it we do as supervisors to nudge it, the original thought. Okay. They just need to finish this thing. Right. And remember Margaret Kiley's, it's not a Nobel Prize, it's a PhD. But everyone will have a few breakthroughs in their thinking. And for that student who shouted at me, the breakthrough in her thinking took place in the Viva, 6 months after she really owned what she learned from the project. Some of the students who might not be coming to you with their problems are stuck. And maybe the thing that they're doing feels at that moment beyond them, or they feel it's cleverer than they are, or they just feel that they've ground themselves into the ground and they're burnt out, they can't actually think another clever thought. So sometimes you're burnt out, and sometimes something is needed just to jolt you out of that sense of being completely stuck. Now, we also thought that some of these stuck places are what we call liminal spaces. They're moments before you start to get that breakthrough, moments before you understand it better. So it's not to see them as the end, but to see them as a space to move through to understand more. And I think as supervisors, there's no point finding things out from research about how students learn unless we actually use it to start helping them make those strides forward and then own it, because we did all that adult stuff. Okay, da-di-da-di-da, and we're looking at what students do and what supervisors do, and there's some early work. So what I'm going to ask you first of all is, do you know about threshold concepts? Anyone heard about threshold concepts? Hands up. Glenn's cousin. We're working with some other people on a research project where they're looking at undergraduate student learning. And like all research projects, they suddenly came up with a really good idea that wasn't really about the project, and then they went off onto that one. And they came up with the idea that in every subject, in every discipline, there are a few key threshold concepts, a few ideas about how knowledge is constructed that you've just got to understand before you can start to construct knowledge yourself, or understand how to think like a biologist or a doctor, medical doctor, or an architect or an environmental scientist or whatever you happen to be. There's a few absolutely essential threshold concepts, and they help unlock the way that subject sees the world. This, by the way, is on Oasis if you want to download it, but do what you want with it. And I can also email you it. Now this sounds, the trouble is that there's been so much work done in this area now that it sounds like it's some kind of club, and you can only enter the club if you know what your threshold concept is. But it's actually not that complicated. I want you to just stay with me for a minute while I share one with you. So you've got to answer a few questions, then I'll tell you a story. What's history? If you're studying it, what is it?
Interpretation of the past.
Well, thank you for that first word that completely ruined the whole of my little setup here.
I succeeded.
No, interpretation. What do lots of people think history is? Facts. Absolutely. It's dates. If you're in England, it's rulers, it's wars, it's facts. Right. But
our history at the moment is very fluid.
Oh yeah, and actually all history is fluid. And you're probably...
It's in the sort of popular mind, but it's fluid.
It's fluid, and the interpretation of it is fluid. And actually I think that one of the things that's interesting to do is to get students to see other people's history and also to look at things from other perspectives, and then they see that history is fluid. It's like you can't just say, no, history is fluid. It's like, oh, I just learnt the stuff up about history and these dates and what happened. How can you question it? Because we know what happened. There was this war, and that's what happened. Right, so history, as presented often in school and in textbooks, is things that happened. But it is fluid, and this is the best place to have that discussion, because it's probably not as much of a problem for you as learning it up in textbooks. So I have to tell you the anecdote about how I discovered it was fluid, and that interpretation is a threshold concept for history. And that is that my dad was in the army and we lived abroad, and I did my matriculation, my A-levels, in 4 different countries. So we started in Singapore, we moved to England, we went to Malta, and I finished off in Cyprus. Yeah, it's really nice, destabilising, defamiliarisation, bit of a mess, really. So I decided I'd do one of my A-level papers all on my own, and I'd try and do it when we were in England, just pick off something, get it done. So I picked a Commonwealth history, that's what it was called, and I thought, well, I'm bound to know some things about this because it's listed where I lived, also Egypt and Germany. And so I asked my dad to get the books, so he organised all the books on the reading list from the local library. So I sat there in my room and I read through them, because I was very diligent and I didn't have anything else to do. Apart from Discover Radio 1, was it? Or some other radio? Anyway. So I read them all through, and you know what? It was very interesting because you could put them into 2 piles. So in this pile it said, we went over there, we brought education, enlightenment, health and railways. Yeah, that's what my dad said. That's what I understood the Commonwealth to be all about. And then you turn to the next group of books, and they had the same dates in them and the same events in them. And they said, we went over there, we imprisoned their leaders, we stole their minerals, and we made them feel like second-class citizens. And I thought, hang on, what's happening? What's happening? What am I discovering? Sorry? Perspective. And what did you say?
For your various people see from various angles.
That's it, yes. It's fluid. You interpret it. Where you're standing means that your interpretation is different. Actually, it isn't fixed. The dates might be fixed. You might be quite unusual to discover that the date when Charles II had his head chopped off was the year after, and all that sort of thing. But maybe what you hear about changes too, as well as the perspective. So I think that at that moment I really discovered a threshold concept about history. Now, I'm just going to share one more with you, and then it's your turn to think of what way of thinking have you absolutely got to understand in your subject. So while you're thinking, oh hell, I'm going to have to think of something here, I'll share a literature one with you. So, have you all heard of Charles Dickens? Yeah, okay. Yeah? No. Did you say no? That was a bit naughty. I mean, usually everyone knows who he is, even if they haven't read him. You've probably heard of Oliver Twist? Okay. Charles Dickens, really very good 19th century writer. Absolutely captures what it was like to live in London, in the slums, with all the houses falling over and people chucking out rubbish and waste in the streets and picking pockets and killing people and, disgusting, horrible kind of conditions. So really realistic detail. You felt you were there with the fog and the mud and the poverty and the slimy streets and the death and the threat and all the rest of it. So it's a realistic portrayal of 19th century London and the life of a gang of thieves, particular reference to one small boy who didn't start out as a thief and doesn't end up as a thief. Yeah? But there's something else that it's about. So the arty people in the room again, this is not that naive, surely. It's also about the link between poverty and crime. The novel is about. The story represents. It's a metaphor for the link between poverty and crime. Because what he's telling us is intense poverty naturally encourages crime. I mean, there's lots of other things it's about as well. And so he's telling you that, he's teaching you that. So on the one hand, we've got lots of realistic detail, but you kind of need to move beyond that without losing the joy of reading that. And say, so what's it telling us? So what? In other words, like your PhD students, so what? So it's also about, so the representation, the realistic representation of stuff is representing a story about poverty and crime. It isn't just as it appears, it also stands for something else. Is that obvious when you read a novel? Have you thought about representation? Representation is one of the threshold concepts in the arts. So images are themselves, but they stand for something. Behind you. The images of them all throwing their caps in the air is not just shadows and stripes of people throwing a cap in the air. What else does it stand for?
Future.
Sorry?
Future.
Future. Achievement. What did you say? Celebration of what? In your degree, yeah. So it represents achievement, future, celebration, intellectual moving on. Yeah, so we get that, don't we? I mean, it's relatively realistic, but it also represents an argument. So representation. A couple of others in literature in particular would be context. So things are produced and read differently in different contexts. Yeah, and for me, cultural context, as well as historical context, is very important there. So you read things differently in different contexts. You write things differently. You've got to know where it comes from and where you're reading it. And the other thing is the form and the language that you're using. Obviously, they help it happen. So there's three. There's probably more, but these are the ones I've spotted. I didn't know anything about this until I started thinking about it quite a long time into my postgraduate study. And I didn't have the labels until I read the theory. Three of mine, and then I want some of yours. First one, I'd written a lot. I drive 80 miles to go and talk to Brian about what I've written. And we've been sending this stuff backwards and forwards. And, he seems to be writing the same things on the side of my work. I don't understand, he's obviously stuck in something. And so we had this conversation, this dialogue that went on for 4 hours, where he kept saying, and so what does that mean then? And so why have you got that there? And so if you read so-and-so and they said this, how did that relate to that then? And so why did you put that there? How does that relate to what you're arguing there then? Can you see these are standard feedback comment things? And I constantly had to think about it. And suddenly I said, oh, is it because this links with that and that happens there? And therefore, and he went, oh, yes. So what helped me understand what was going on? Actually, that was the core argument that then went all the way through the rest of the thesis that we were working on. And I'd just been doing stuff. I worked very hard, but it was all just stuff, nothing linked. So what helped me there? Questions, yeah. What sort of questions? Something that what do you think about it? You've got to think about it. You've got to. We spent most of that time on a paragraph actually, because he just wanted me to understand what was going on and what was not going on in my writing. So what can you do then? Let's get this a little bit more complicated than the word questions, which is what they are. What can you do with your students' writing and with your supervision sessions to prompt that? Because that was a breakthrough. I understood where he was going, but he didn't tell me. He didn't ever tell me. I had to get that.
Ask them to explain.
Yeah, why?
Explain why.
Yeah, why is this? Why are you making that case? What's the basis? What else do you do?
I just think that students get so engrossed in what they're doing. They're reading and reading and reading, so their vision is narrowed down. So you come from the outside and just ask difficult questions or just, see them.
Well, you're asking so what questions quite a lot of the time, but they are quite difficult because their head is stuck in the detail. I mean, their head's stuck in the detail of the reading they've been doing when they're talking about literature review, which is why I think that's the key moment where this breakthrough starts to happen, because it's quite clear that you work really hard in putting together a literature review. Reading this, reading this, reading this, reading this, adding this to this, to this, to this, to this, to this. We talked a bit about this yesterday. Adding, until you suddenly understand that there's some themes and some arguments and some developments. People build on people. There are some key people whose ideas that go all the way through. There are some ongoing arguments, and that you have to step back from the flat mass of the reading that you've just been saying, and this, and this, and this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and see what those major arguments and themes are. And when you've got that, you are answering the so what's there question, really, aren't you? And not just saying, well, look, it's there, get on with it, I did all that work, you read it. You're pulling out the meaning and the argument. So the literature review is a good piece of work to sit with the student and ask, so how does that link with that? So what are the main arguments that are coming out of that then? So how does that build on that? So what's your point? So what does your work fit? Which of these, where are you in that debate that's going on? So who's doing that? Where do you fit in the dialogue? How can you contribute to the dialogue? One of the students at the end of the research project said, I now understand that research is just a contribution to an ongoing conversation. What they know already with this very differently conceptualized knowledge, and they have some kind of new understanding from realizing that things can be different. And the other thing about it is it's troublesome, because you've had a way of thinking before that you're quite comfortable with, even if it's a bit rigid or it's a bit limited or you're a bit fed up with it, and now you've got to shake up the way you think, and that's uncomfortable, so it's troublesome. When we then said, so what are these learning needs to happen at PhD level or doctoral level or MA level, the students actually use some of these words. So I give you them now. Ontological change and epistemological contribution. And to me, if you kind of give me some of those words back, you've made some kind of leap into the language. However, what we meant was changing the way you see yourself in the world. So they'd start to say things like, I'm a researcher now, or I am a doctoral student. I'm doing a PhD. And that's an identity thing. And they'd also say, I can see what my contribution to knowledge is. I can see what I can add. And they became aware of being a researcher who's achieving something and having a knowledge contribution to make. These are breakthroughs. They weren't just doing stuff. They were aware of these changes. So they actually used the words. So what do they say then? They say things like this. In terms of learning moments, I think you have those small or medium moments every now and again, don't you? When you read and you're exposed to new ideas and you think, oh, now I've got it. And then actually, a couple of weeks later, you're a bit further on. But then you have another one of these moments, and so you kind of gradually, I guess, get closer and closer to the final thing, the final shape of your theories and ideas about it. So it's not just one breakthrough moment that hasn't happened yet. It's kind of, okay. Oh, now that, sometimes it's building it together like a Lego thing. Sometimes it's a revelation that, like a kaleidoscope, one of them used that image, brought all the different coloured pieces into a shape that they hadn't imagined before. So that shape of kaleidoscope, see it differently, it comes into a different shape. Or these stages of understanding, or both. You know, it's not a finite science. I want to cut it up for you in several sections because there's a couple of problems and a couple of breakthroughs. It's quite long. A couple of weeks ago, I found that things have stopped. Mentally, I found myself up against a brick wall. I just felt I was kind of stuck and it wasn't moving and it was all bitty. I'd done all of these chunks of work, but I couldn't really see how they fitted together, and so I reached quite a crisis point. What's happened? Don't go any further. What's happened?
The thread is not going through.
There's no thread through it. There's no thread of argument. There's no themes. They're stuck. And how does it feel?
Demotivated.
Demotivated. No energy. What can I do with this? They've done loads of work though. That's sitting on a pile of stuff, aren't they? Students go through this. I haven't met one who hasn't been through this, where there's stuff all over the place, and they have no idea what to do to pull it together into some kind of argument, and they just feel exhausted by the thought of it. Okay, so that's bad. And the next thing is, especially when I got negative feedback, I just felt quite downhearted about it. So to add insult to injury, the supervisor says, this is a bit of a mess, isn't it? Or, you've really got, what's the point? So what, they said. And they didn't kind of nuance so what a bit, like we would do. And then what happens is two things help them. But like I say, I think having the supervision, talking it through, taking a step back from everything, taking it to bits and being questioned about everything, and then having to simplify everything in order to present. I mean, over a couple of days. My supervision was one day, my presentation was the next day. I came out of that whole process feeling that I could kind of see it. I could see there were shapes there. I could see shapes. Mark McKay, Jerry Mullins. Analysis of examiner reports. What are examiners looking for? So I want you to kind of shift out of the clever stuff we've been doing, because this is what examiners are looking for, that clever stuff. You know, we spend the morning thinking about how can we support our students emotionally to be able to get through this process. The rest of the morning we're thinking about working at a higher level. This is definitely one to take a photo of, although it is also on Oasis. But take a photo of this, because this I keep using this. What I want you to think about is how you get your student from the less than ideal thesis through to good thesis. And it's very interesting what the characteristics are here. So my question is, how do you get them from the right to the left? And I'm not saying that the ones on the less than ideal thesis have failed. They're just not as good as they could be. I'll finish the photo shoot and then we'll think about it. Okay, let me read through what the good thesis has got, and you can nod and think about what does this mean. A good thesis has critical analysis and argument, confidence and a rigorous self-critical approach. Alright, stop there for a minute. What does it mean by confidence and a rigorous self-critical approach? What do you think?
I want you to reflect on the work you do.
Yes. I mean, there's a moment in our vivas where someone says, why did you do it the way that you did it? What are the limitations of the way that you did it? And since your students don't get asked that unless they really need that, you really have got to get them to put that in the text. Why did you do it this way? Why didn't you do it that way? What can you not get by doing it the way that you did it? You know, you do know that if you interview people, there's going to be some subjective stuff going on in there that you need to kind of filter out when you listen to them. and you too, because you're probably affecting what they say, right? You being who you are as opposed to somebody else. So you say what the limitations are. Students find that quite difficult sometimes because they think, once I've got it, I want to let them know that I think there's a problem with it. I need to tell them that this is the best way to do it. Yeah.
Is it true if I say, I would often say to the students, most of us would do it differently if we had to do it again.
Yeah.
But as long as you can reflect and say, these are the limitations of my state, I'm sure it will be good enough, even if the limitation is major.
Yes. I mean, and if it's so major that it makes nonsense of what they found, then you've got a bigger problem. But normally, what you don't say, like you don't enter a PhD saying there is no literature on this. So my contribution is going to be huge because no one's ever written anything about it. Because back in my mind, I'm thinking, well, but maybe they've done this or that or that. Things from a different angle, from a different context will be there. So this is the only way to do it. It's a very naive statement because obviously other people might do it differently. So limitations of why you did it the way you did it and of what you found. And when you do a research project, you can see that you're not getting everything, you're only getting some things. Yeah.
I think in terms of confidence, you should be able to own your own work because you did the work.
Yes. And speak with confidence about what that main argument is, what the thread is, what the meaning, what the importance of the work is. So it's that kind of confidence in you did it, you owned it, you got your voice. And I think when you were left on your own, you developed that. And this is what happened with the doctoral authors. When they came to present, they knew what they were doing. They weren't just handing stuff in, because they had to take ownership of it. Okay, a contribution to knowledge. Originality, creativity, and a degree of risk-taking. Right, I'm going to do that one here. The risk-taking bit is the thing that I was surprised. But then I thought, hang on, you know, you are pushing boundaries a bit when you do doctoral work, aren't you? And you are taking risks sometimes, even in the statements of value you're making, and your interpretation of the data, and even in maybe doing the work in the first place. When trying to come up with a research question, when trying to make your major statement from your data, I think that we're looking at the whole cake is like the whole field. Your slice of cake is your PhD or your master's. I need to know that you've done all of this reading and you know all of these theories, and then you know that you can do something else, and you've been selected, and you know why you've selected this, and you can defend why you selected it, and you know that there are other things you could have done, and you make a proper argument about why you didn't do them. So you've been comprehensive in that you covered the ground. You know what's out there, but you've also been scholarly because you've made a selection that you can defend. And the first one is about the research area that you're looking at, your slice of cake. Does that all make sense? I always find myself drawing that with students when they say, well, I want to do this. You know, the student with the research question yesterday, I want to look at this, I want to look at this, the one that was doing African American women's rights, I want to look at this, and this about it, that, and that about it. You go, whoa, that's really interesting. So I've got a good sense that you know the field, comprehensive. What exactly is your bit of that field, and can you tell me why you want to do that bit? And later on, don't worry about it, later on, for your master's, your PhD, or your book, you can do another slice or two. You know, you're not stopped, but you've got to tell me what you found and what matters and why you did that. So I think, you know, this is my favourite diagram, and I've left it till last.